Is Civil Power by Brian Train. This is again a review copy from CSL, small company, does print on demand stuff through a publisher, well, through a printer, and that gets sent to you. Sent me a few copies of games. I tried one, Galicia. Now I'm moving on to this one. This is the only one in the stock that's not written by sort of the company owner. But Brian Train is a regular feature over on BGG, has done a few games that I'm interested in. I think he's been involved in some things I like. I've also watched playtests of his games, may have been involved in some of them way back in the days that I was at the CSW Expo, when I lived within walking distance of it. And he seems like a nice guy in person, as well as having a particular interest in, well, counterinsurgency, more modern stuff. In this case, we're looking at something that not a lot has been done on, which is tactical street fighting between mobs, protesters, and less organized forces and the police. And there are a bunch of scenarios in this. Now, I've run into a bit of a hitch with this one. Now, remember, and I haven't looked online yet, I may have to, well, I'm going to, but it may or may not solve my purpose. So, there's a few things that are weird in my set. First of all, it only talks about an east and west map in it. And there's 4 maps in the game. My components, I have 2 copies of each, the east and west. Is that what you're expected? I don't know. It seems a little odd to have a posh hotel and a plaza duplicated. These are supposed to be kind of geomorphics. And likewise, the city park or whatever is duplicated. That seems like a waste. Something that isn't going to feel quite right. Like, why not have multiple, have 4 different maps? And in fact, if possible, why not backprint them? So that you have more opportunities. But okay, there's nothing that indicates that this is wrong in the game. There's nothing that indicates that it's right either. When I look at the components, I think I have everything. I made a screw up here. This is the second time this has happened, where the counter sprues contain something that you're supposed to keep. And it's not trivial to see, especially with these kind of print-on-demand type games where who the hell knows how clear it is. But, oh man, somebody's got to leap that out, have a sticker on the counter sheet or something. Do not throw away the frame, as this is becoming, you know, a habit. This was a case in the 1914 games, not the ones by this designer, but the GMT ones, where the counter sprues are important for indicating front boundaries. And obviously I just threw them out in the first one, and in the second one I bought a used copy where the guy who bought it before me did the same. You know, so I'm using, you know, I was using twist ties in that place. And I can do the same here. Here it's meant for barriers and barricades between spaces. But it's a really, really bad thing to try to use that extra space without bringing it to attention before somebody reads the rules. People often punch and clip and whatever their counters long before they get around to reading rules. So, yeah. What else? So the components a set of counters, 2 geomorphic maps of imaginary emergent urban area. Well, maybe I've got double the maps I'm supposed to. Maybe that's the issue. And I can't complain about that. Apparently the packaging done by the printer has been really iffy. Out of 3 games, if there are only supposed to be 2 maps here, every that I've opened up and looked at that they put together for me, every single one of them had something wrong with it. Galicia and the company, the designer of the games is being forced to, or is whatever, moving to a different printer in the future. So unless you have an order already out, you're not getting anything from this printer. But yeah, Galicia came with the East Prussia counters. East Prussia came with the Galicia counters. Okay, they're both going to the same person. I could see, a little pile being put together and boom, 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 and just getting it screwed up. Fine. But I got 2 copies of the Galicia map, 1 in each of those games. And then when I asked for a replacement, I got another Galicia map. Finally, they replaced it with the proper map. But now I've got like 3 copies of the Galicia map, which, if anybody wants a really, really nice map from Galicia, I don't know. I guess hit me up. I'm not really good at mailing things, but if you're local and you want one, you can come by my house. Anyway, it is a pretty map, and I'll probably end up using them for something else. Okay. Now, the other thing that is disturbing, though, has more to do with, and I usually place games down already set up so that I can describe things a little better. The other issue that this game seems to have, there it is. Nope. They tell you what the different values on a counter are here, which isn't, I think, in the rules. But what they don't tell you is what the symbols on the counters mean. Now, for any given scenario, and I was going to do the oldest one first, because I'm weird that way, which would be Bloody Week in France during the Paris Commune, Napoleon III era, whatever. First of all, it's small. Doesn't have, it specifies units. Some of the games only allow you to get something based on, hey, here's the cost for the force. Or you also have the option to get one of these packages that, in a scenario rather than buying individual pieces. And I'd rather go with either a fixed setup or a package, because I want to get a feel for the game. There's quite a few scenarios in the game. Well, what there isn't, though, is something that tells you what the difference between like a line, a tactical, an armed reserve, an unarmed reserve, a SWAT. None of that is marked on any of these. I can make my guesses. I know these are mounted police, but various types can be mounted, and that's kind of confusing. I have no concept of what these different counters are, and there's nothing in the rules. There's no key to indicate what they are. So, yeah, that's a little problematic. If there's errata online or a question online, and this was, this has been around for a little while. I mean, this game didn't just show up. You would think that somebody had already asked it, and it would maybe have made its way into this print-on-demand situation. It's going to be a little complicated to add in, though, because essentially you would have to put graphics somewhere to indicate it. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, there may be a delay in terms of anything like that being implemented. I don't know. Certainly a clarification on the maps, if sending 4 out as usual, would be helpful, but if not, whatever, I can do something with the excess. All right, since I can't set the game up right away, I'm gonna start digging into the rules and give you an idea of, well, and refresh my own idea of how this thing is going to be played. But again, it's kind of tough when, I don't know, you know, what am I looking at here? I can try to make guesses, you know, based on the values. But what's weird is, so another thing is each of these has back face counters that are in some cases different. Okay, so it's not the case, and I don't know if I had thought it was, that you flip this over and it becomes a weaker version of the other. There are disruption counters, suppressed counters, which prevent you from firing. So yeah, I mean, what kind of police? That would be unarmed reserve, I guess, on the other side here, these guys. Which means that probably this is armed reserve. Oh, we got values on them. We got values on them. I didn't notice that. So that'll help. So yeah, tactical is this 8-7. I thought this was just a cost sheet. Okay, so this should be doable. Well, let me try setting this up, and then I'll get to the rules. You know, things are not easily accessible to my brain unless they're spelled out more carefully than I'm seeing here. But yeah, this chart definitely does seem to cover the information that I need. Sweet. Another component issue, as I've sorted out the rest of the counters, is these are distinguishable from each other, supposedly. I mean, I can, but you need better lighting than I have to do that. There are some scenarios where these forces are different from these forces, where you're using just one of those countermix for one player, one for the other. The colorations are too close to each other for my eyes. I can, you know, if I shine a light directly on them, I can tell. Barely. Not well enough that I'd be happy playing the game, even with the light shining directly on it. I would probably still make mistakes. That probably should be fixed. Just a little bit more darkening to these, or I don't know, a little bit more red tone under them. Who knows? I've been delaying playing this for some time for a number of reasons. One is, you know, I was excited about some of the ideas and asked for this one specifically, A, because it's Brian Train and, you know, I'm interested in his stuff, and B, because I kind of didn't think the right thoughts about it. Like, I don't do a lot of research when people ask me, hey, what would you be interested in? Even when I buy games, I don't do a lot of research. That's why a lot of my games end up not being things I like that much. And in this particular case, I didn't realize that it was purely going to be a tactical combat game. Most of the things that I see that Brian Train does have more to do with either a little bit of political mixed in with them, or the counterinsurgency type aspects and everything. And I can see where he would do this. It's my own fault for picking something that's going to be, honestly, it looks and feels a little bit to me like, looking for it. I can't find it. I was going to say Azanti High Lightning, the Traveler tactical combat aboard the spaceships. Yeah, it's different. This is mob forces and whatnot, and has different kind of things. But it just feels kind of that way, with limited movement and shots and wounds in action and kills in action and all that. All right, let me set this sucker up and see what I can do. To give an idea of how much I'm dragging my fucking feet. So I say I'm going to set it up. Instead, I go downstairs and I watch a video and come back up. And I spend like 10 minutes. Now, I just got laid off, which sucks and all or something. I don't know. But, you know, this is the kind of habit that I was in. And no, not because of my habits, but rather because of... because my whole group got cut away. This is the kind of habit that I got into at work was, you know, I would take a little break away from work and spend 10 or 15 minutes on a game and then wander, you know, go back to work. And it was my way of taking a little break since, you know, I don't have any of the normal social aspects working from home. But you know, I'm kind of following that same pattern here, but which I think is a sign that you're not going to see any kind of bonus out of me not working in terms of video production. I'm just going to do the things that I kind of did at work, but without the work part, you know, like listen to videos as I'm, I don't know, spamming online or something instead of working. All right, but where were we? So I pulled out the counters. Now, there weren't enough in any single color group as far as I can identify a color group for the mob. That's okay, it's a two-player scenario, so in a sense, the fact that the colors are very close works better for two-player scenarios because I can disregard this difference in color much more easily. So maybe that's the thinking there. I don't know. And looking up the units, one I wasn't able to find a copy for, and I think the designer may care about this, which is the field artillery. Now, this is very clearly a field artillery, but there's nothing marked at 15. It's just, it's not on the chart. So I read through this. All the police are going to come on any one map edge on turn 1. Okay. The mob force, which doesn't include any actual mobs, it's just small groups of violent armed people, including a couple of snipers, all are able to set up, but up to 5 of them can set up hidden. That's going to be a little obnoxious. So maybe I won't set up, maybe I'll just go to the rules. We use only the east map. The park is the Belleville Cemetery, surrounded by a hedge. Each area in the cemetery is full of headstones. Players move through these areas as if they were clear. Line of sight may be traced into, but not through. Okay, so there's not much there. So I guess rather than setting up, because the mob is going to be completely free setup, and is going to have hidden counters, which is going to be recorded on paper, I will start digging into the rules. I feel so disorganized in terms of like how I'm facing this. I don't know what else to do. I need to start getting this video completed. You know, a lot of times when I have a lot of scenarios, you know, say the GBOH stuff or whatever, I just play through them all. I don't think that's going to happen here. I really don't think this is my kind of game in a lot of ways, and it was my own fault for not researching. So, okay. put the map in the middle of the table or whatever. So the basic game turn order is going to follow the following. First, a mutual gas and fire check phase. And we have this somewhere. Yeah, we have this spelled out on here. All mob units occupying areas with gas have to make a morale check. Now, there's an important question of what is a mob and what is a what. Mob is a player side. We'll also have crowds, which are these units, generally unarmed, but with a lot of force to them. We'll see that they're handled a little different than some other units. So all mob units occupying gas make a morale check. The police are assumed to be wearing gas masks. Remove all the gas 2 markers, flip the remaining over, i.e. the gas slowly dissipates. Roll a die for each fire map. This is really just an interface type thing. Roll a die for each fire marker on the map. On a 6, the fire goes out and the marker's removed. Okay. Then we go to an individual player turns, I guess. Let's see. Yeah. So we go to the 2-player turns. This is not well expressed in terms of visual. It's spelled out in this paragraph, but like this should be an interface between pairs of player turns. And, you know, SPI used to do this much, much better. They would have this spelled out, and then they would take a few lines just to show these 4 step names under the 2nd player turn to indicate very clearly that there's, you know, an interface and then 2 player turns containing the same stuff. I find it disturbing that they don't do that. It took up a little bit of my time to figure it out. Of course, it takes up a little bit less space, perhaps. I don't know. All right, so the first thing is the phasing player can do fire combat. Then they may move. Then they can do shock combat. And then their friendly units that were suppressed previously recover their suppression automatically. Suppression is basically kind of like a pinned result. You're not able to fire, move, whatever. All right, during movement, you move from one area to an adjacent area, expending points from your movement allowance. Movement allowance is where you'd expect it, lower right. You can see the print jobs kind of cut off some of the numbers. Not a very good... I didn't see this in the other games. Well, in the Galicia game. We'll see about anything else. I didn't see this kind of, hey, some of the counters have been rendered unusable or unreadable, because they're usable, due to print misalignment. But again, different printer, so who knows. During movement, you move from area to area. Crowd units may not move or retreat diagonally. Everything else can. And again, the crowd is a couple of specific types of units that the mob might have. Units have to stop when they contain an area, when they enter an area containing an enemy unit. And then they'll have to conduct shock combat. A unit that attacked in fire phase may move in the movement phase, but it cannot enter an enemy space and attack them with shock combat. So, you know, no blasting your shotgun and charging it afterwards. Units may be moved or retreated off the edge of the map. If they do so, they're removed from the game. They don't count as eliminated. They just left. Went and found something better to do. Stacking. More than one unit may be present in an area at the end of each movement phase. These are the per side limits, any number of individual or vehicle units, up to 3 group units. Most of these are group units. 1 or sometimes 2 crowds. Again, crowds are specific things. These are all combined, like There's no, hey, groups have X stacking points and crowds have Y. There's no extra cost through moving through friendly units. However, crowds have some limitations, which says C4.4. There is no 4.4. I assume they mean 4.3. Again, I don't know if there's a RADA. All right, buildings. We got buildings on the map. Mounted police vehicles and crowds cannot enter buildings. Doors or windows are assumed to exist in each area of the building so you can get in or out. You don't have to worry. Buildings all have 2 levels. You're on the first level unless you have a second level marker on your stack or group or whatever. This will give you a height advantage in certain areas. You're assumed to have ways up and down in each area. It costs a unit 2 movement points to change levels. Opposing units must be in the same area at the same level if they're going to shock. Crowd movement and crowd surge. Crowds can't move or retreat diagonally, nor can they enter buildings. Crowds cannot move through other crowd units except when retreating. Normally only 1 crowd can be present in an area, but 2 can gather together where the enemy units are, in which case those units must be attacked during the shock combat phase. Okay, we got values. I need another fucking break. I'm sorry. I don't know what has happened, but I have so little will to face this. I am so sorry. To combat. Units have a value for fire and shock combat, and those are the 2 top values. I'll Panzerblitz. Except instead of armor, they have a morale value. Okay. Units may always reduce their numerical combat strengths in order to avoid bloodshed. What it doesn't say is when you do this. I would assume it's before you make a die roll, but always almost indicates, hey, look, I got a K. I want to drop that down 1. Make sure I don't kill anyone. That feels like modifying, reality, kind of like hero points in some role-playing games and stuff. Oh, I don't accept this result. I'm not fond of that, so I'm going to say you have to make that decision ahead of time. And I don't mind that that's not spelled out, but, Units that attack in a fire combat phase may move in that ensuing movement phase, but they can't move into areas causing them to shock. I have to pause and relight. There's this sort of, hey, just keep pushing on, push through, but I want to be comfortable. Often you're going to have to make a morale check. You roll a die. There might be some modifiers, depending on the phase and circumstances, which, I don't know. I mean, you might have some spelled out here. I don't know. Here we go. Morale checks. Doesn't have any modifiers. Modifiers to die roll, but that's not fire combat morale check modifiers. Depending on how much hurt you're putting on them and whether there's an agitator. Shock combat also has its modifiers. Okay. I assume modifiers to die roll are not to the morale check because they wouldn't make sense. If you roll greater than the checking unit's morale, the unit gets a suppressed marker, and it's basically not going to be able to do much until after it spends a turn resting or hiding, cowering. If it rolls a 7 or greater, though, the checking unit is simply eliminated. Now, this doesn't indicate death. This indicates disintegration of whatever that is, or running from the scene or whatever, which is important because killing and wounding units is actually a negative in most scenarios. If you think about that, if the police kill protesters, that creates that creates sort of media antagonism or popular antagonism to the police. But likewise, if police are killed, that also degrades the overall opinion that the populace has towards whatever motives the most protests have. And that may not be so much the case in some of these scenarios, like there's the Intifada and stuff like that, where it's like, well, whose victory points are you counting, if you're looking at the Israeli population, yeah, they're going to hate to see police being killed, but they're probably not. Well, we'll see what that scenario looks like, but they're probably not going to be too pro-revolt anyway. And in terms of what the actual mob is trying to do, killing police becomes kind of a rallying cry. Effects of suppression. Suppressed units may move but may not enter areas with enemy units, even if friendly units are there. I didn't know they could move. They can't initiate fire or shock combat. They cannot use any tear gas Molotovs. They have a shock combat of 0. Suppressed units, which I think there was a question about because... Nope. I thought there was an odds-based shock combat, but there is not. A suppressed unit has a shock. Suppressed units automatically recover at the end of the next player turn, basically. Now, so during the gas, I'm not sure this works the way it's being described, or I'm not sure my thought is working right. But during the mutual gas and fire phase, they say to tilt, he uses the word crank, the suppression markers. Well, that creates, and that'll indicate which ones are available to be unsuppressed during their next player turn. That creates an asymmetry that I'm not sure I agree with. Okay, so let's take a look at what this does. If this is the time when the markers are turned, all right, player A would be making their own shock attacks, which might suppress them, but in general, they're going to be suppressing player B with their attacks. You don't want them recovering from their shock attacks. That's fine. So I feel like the tilt should happen in the player turn. If there is any. Because if we go down to player B, and this is where spelling this out in 2 sets would help. What tilting it here would mean is that fire combat by player A is going to suppress units not only for the remainder of player A's turn, for the shock phase, for player B's turn, but then through the next player A as well. Because the recovery is linked to the player turn. Nothing should be outside the player turn for the tilting. So the tilting shouldn't be done during mutual gas and fire phase. It should be done at the beginning of a given player turn, just to ensure that everybody's getting the same amount of time suppressed. I get the feeling that the tilting is put in place to try to prevent, basically what it's trying to prevent is, oh, I shock combat you, but I can ignore those effects. And that's the kind of thing that comes up in playtesting. Unfortunately, and this game has been around, Brian wrote this back in the 90s originally, in some form or another since back then. So, you'd think something like that would be caught with that much time sitting on the books, but who knows? But yeah, that's the sign of like 1 round of playtesting and a second round not catching it. And I mean, this is the kind of thing that I can just catch reading the rules. Like, wow, that's really wrong. That's a problem. Okay. Where are we? Yeah, you can't do it during the gas and fire check. It's got to be on the player turn. And that will solve both both issues. The one that they're trying to correct, and being multiply suppressed doesn't have any additional effect. In fire combat, these are voluntary. They're directed by friendly units at enemy units using a line of sight. And you can make one fire combat attack per phase and may choose one enemy unit to fire upon. A unit may be attacked any number of times by fire combat. You can fire in any direction. You can choose one enemy unit in one area to fire upon. Yeah, we said that already. Units may combine fire strength into one attack on one unit if they're adjacent to each other or in the same area and both have a line of sight to the same target. Except that snipers can't combine with anything else. Now, if we look at the fire combat table, I'm not sure how much advantage combining really does. Because you're rolling a d6, assuming you have a chance to hit. There are possible modifiers there. The target being suppressed reduces the chances of hitting them, firing through defenses, etc. So in order to overcome minuses makes sense, but if you trace the line up, I get a 1 in 6 for the first 3. The next 2 adds another one. Yay! It's going to take some getting used to figure out, what the sweet spots are on here in terms of, because my first 3 guys give me a 1 in 6 chance. My next 2 guys essentially double my chance of hitting. And then 2 more. Yeah, I think combining fire actually looks quite potent, at least at these levels. Now, you don't want to combine fire to where it's going to get you into the kills level, though, if kills penalize your victory points. You roll a die 6, modify it, and no matter what, the unit is going to take a morale check for being fired on, which could just dissipate the unit. Any W or K results are noted on scratch paper by the suffering player. We also have sheet markers to track that, which might be easier. W and K results are doubled if you're hitting crowds. Firing on individuals, a W or K will eliminate the unit. Ranged fire on line of sight, maximum range is can attack is equal to 1/2 the fire strength measured in areas and rounded up. But snipers have an unlimited range as long as they have line of sight, and some special weapons have additional range. The line of sight has to be free of obstruction, traced from the center of the target unit's area. Buildings, barricades, gas, friendly or enemy group or crowd units all block line of sight through their area. Firing units can trace line of sight through these obstacles if they or the target are at least 1 level higher than the obstacle. Remember, there's only 2 levels in the game, so this works out pretty easily. The maximum length of a line of sight at night is 3 areas, except for police snipers who, obviously not in 1871, but I don't have any, who are assumed to have night vision equipment and unlimited range. Fire combat modifiers are spelled out here, and we looked at those. Height, the SWAT team has a bonus to firing. So instead of just giving them more strength points or something, they're also giving them a die roll benefit. What's not clear, and sniper is the same thing. What's not clear is whether or not that counts if a SWAT team's firing with a non-SWAT team. I would assume yes. It's just if a SWAT team is firing, and that's why the sniper, which has a +2 bonus, was not is not allowed to combine. Although I don't know, 2 snipers wouldn't. All right. Fire combat modifiers, height advantage. At least one of them has to be at least 1 level higher. Again, at least one. At least one is SWAT, trained with that automatic fire. Apply the DRM for barricades and windows if any LOS to the target unit is traced through such an object in the target's areas. Note that the barricade advantage can be lost if the defender has a height advantage, and that the barricades are initially placed in buildings to further fortify the area. Okay. We got a example. Now, one of the things, calling things pistol punks and shotgun punks, that shows something about the designer, I have to say. I'm not sure what it shows, but using the term punk, certainly a derogatory term, but also possibly not, depending on what viewpoint you're looking at. To me, it might actually show sort of an antagonism towards the crowds or towards the mob side. But I don't know. Okay. Shock combat occurs when friendly and enemy units are in the same area. It's mandatory. The player whose turn it is the attacker, the other player is the defender. Both sides are going to be making a roll based on their shock combat total against the enemy to see what they do. Now, a morale check isn't automatic in shock combat, which to me is kind of shocking. I mean, yes, taking any fire is probably got a good chance of making you cower, whereas being in a brawl is less frightening, I guess. I don't know. I mean, cowering's less effective, I'll say that much. Okay. All units on one side total their shock combat strength. You roll a die and apply modifiers, and then the other player does the same. The results are applied to all the enemy units in the area. If there are still opposing units after the shock combat, they repeat the process again and again, even if one side is suppressed, until only one side is left in the area. A suppressed unit has a shock combat value of 0. Only the side with the smaller total of shock combat strengths must conduct a retreat if it's indicated to have one. Now, let's look at the values. The numbers on here are retreats. X's are a retreat with additional casualties, and MC is to do the morale check. The modifiers, if any of the enemy are already suppressed, you get a bonus. Units in a building, or if the enemy crossed a barricade or hedge, gives you a benefit. And police firing baton rounds, rubber bullets and whatnot, because they're more willing to shoot them, I guess, in that close combat situation. I don't know. I really don't know. Because, again, the game's covering stuff in 1871 where obviously baton rounds aren't going to be there, but also the police probably aren't that upset with firing a revolver in close combat and taking their chances at hitting a friendly unit. Just because of the mores of the age. Okay, if a retreat is indicated against the sides with the larger total, the units don't have to make a retreat, but they do have to make a morale check. You'll see there's a morale check included in every result that has any value at all. A player may voluntarily retreat one area in place of rolling the die, but the other player still gets to hit them as they're running away. We've got modifiers here. Up to 2 friendly crowd units can stack in an area in the movement phase, but the area has to have enemy units. We talked about that before. In the shock combat phase, the 2 crowds can add their shock combat strengths. Well, all units add their shock combat strengths. I'm trying to see what the bonus here is, because there's nothing on the die roll modifier that I see. Okay. If at the end of any shock combat process in the area, I think it's just that those big units get to add together, is the only bonus involved. There are no enemy units and both crowds are still there. One crowd has to leave the area, moving orthogonally. Remember, crowds cannot move diagonally ever. In an area that's both legal to enter and does not contain a friendly crowd unit. If the crowd has moved into an area containing enemy units, it can shock again. And I'm guessing No, this will only be during your own player turn. Okay. If all areas adjacent to the area already have crowds in them, then all units in the area are suppressed. In the player's next movement phase, if the area is still overstacked, they must move one or both crowd units out of the area to comply with the stacking limit. Okay. Retreat rules look complex. My battery's running out, and I can use another break. Again, I'm struggling with this more than anything else, and I have to soldier on to get through it. Okay, pushing on. Retreats. When a unit has to retreat, it has to move one or two areas. Can't go through prohibited terrain or areas containing enemy group or crowd. You can retreat through empty areas. No, you must retreat through empty areas. If none are available, you can retreat through an area containing friendly units. If you're retreating through an area that exceeds the stacking limit in that area for its size, then both the retreating unit and one other unit of that size are suppressed. If the player's next movement phase, they're still overstacked, you must move the units out of the area to comply with stacking. Agitators and TV crews can accompany retreating mob units at the mob player's discretion. A unit that retreats off the map may not return to the game, but is not counted as eliminated. A unit on a second level of building that must retreat may retreat one area to the street level of the same area, or to an adjacent building at the second level. No. That's kind of hard to picture. Yeah, there's some cases where you might be able to leap from roof to roof or something, if that's what's being represented. But I'm picturing people like kind of hanging out a window and propelling themselves forward through the next window, which I guess probably isn't what's being seen. It's being seen more of the roof to roof side of things. But again, you know, you're not going to have a mob up on a pitched roof. Well, mobs can't go on buildings, but whatever. Well, a crowd. A unit may not retreat directly from the second level of an area to the street level of an adjacent area. No heroic leaps from windows. But again, I'm seeing that second level to second level with disconnected buildings being exactly that, even more unbelievable, because at least gravity does work. You could jump out of a second level window. You wouldn't probably continue with whatever you're doing. The DRM for retreating, for no retreat route. Let's see about that. Where it is. I don't see it here. I don't see it here. So let's see, the DRM is applied, no retreat route. I'm not seeing it. I don't know. I guess we'll keep reading, but it doesn't seem to exist. If the unit checking morale is required to retreat but is in an area from which it could not retreat. Now, you don't normally check morale if... Oh, here we go. Shock combat. Unit has no retreat route. Okay, so this is weird. The unit checking morale is required to retreat. Okay, so you have a retreat number or an X already on you. Yeah, but cannot retreat due to being surrounded or enemy units. In this case, the DRM is equal to the number of areas the unit's supposed to retreat, as indicated on the CRT. Cumulative with any other DRMs, the unit that's required to retreat 2, but it can only retreat 1, gets a 1-point penalty. Okay. Suppression recovery of player units were suppressed in the previous game turn automatically recover. Now, again, technically that works because previous game turn. mechanically, philosophically, whatever, and any kind of attempt at realism, it doesn't work because game turns are pulsed. So you got this mutual gas check phase, which is when you crank them or whatever. One player does one of all of these, the next player does one of all of these. What it means is the first player gets to recover more quickly than the second player in most cases. I don't like that fundamentally. I believe that's an error. I've said already, I think that's something that should have been caught in playtesting, in some second round of playtesting, because I'm guessing the first round had a certain effect. But yeah, technically that is actually what they're saying. If you were suppressed any time during the first game turn, you recover at the end of your turn in the second, which I don't like that kind of situation, because the first player could get suppressed at the very end of the second game turn and recover during the opposing player's turn, and recover during their own turn at the end of their own turn. So they miss really a grand total of one of their own turns, and that's it. They could be suppressed during the shock combat of the enemy. Now, if on the other hand, the second player is suppressed during the first player's fire combat phase or whatever, it doesn't really matter. But early in the, during the first player's turn, they miss the remainder of the first player's turn, fine. They miss their second player's turn. They miss the next first player's turn while still suppressed, and the next second player turn while still suppressed. That seems excessive. And again, I think it should be based on player turn, not on game turn. So I will probably be making that change myself. But yeah, the rules as written are consistent. They just don't conform to any kind of reality I would put in play. Unless, the first player is always the police or the elite units or whatever, then maybe you can make an argument about it. I mean, let's see. Let's see what the scenarios say. Well, actually, it doesn't say. So there's no general. Police and thieves are always listed first. Now, here's what's going to be problematic, though. If there's two mobs, but when there's two mobs, there is actually a who goes first rule that happens, that changes from turn to turn. So this may be intentional, and maybe I will use the rules as written, because every scenario has a police force, and the police force is always going to get the advantage out of that. All right. So I will read it as intentional as opposed to accidental. Now again, if these were two military forces, I would apply all those gripes that I had. All right, tear gas. Tear gas is bought by the police at the beginning of the game, or you have it for the scenario. Basically, it's tracked as a record. You mark how many, just like I have with these Molotovs, how many tear gas you have, and each time you use one, it costs you one off there. There's two ways to deliver tear gas. One is through gas grenades. One is through throwing the gas grenade, and the other is from firing gas guns. Unsuppressed units can basically toss a gas grenade into an adjacent space. The gas gun can place it any one area that the fire can draw a clear line of sight up to 6 areas away. I don't know, I would assume night affects that, but enemy and friendly units do not block line of sight because the gas canisters are lobbed overhead in either case, like a t-shirt cannon. When using hand grenades, one gas marker is placed in an area adjacent to the police unit. Either way, you spend the gas. Police are not affected by tear gas. The gas clouds last 2 turns. They're 1 level higher, and a line of sight can be traced into but not through. Police are affected by line of sight effects. It doesn't specify, but again, that's the kind of thing that, like, if rules do spell out, the rule book ends up bloated to about twice the size. And you just, like, want to smack the people who might cause that to be required to be in there. Oh, fuck, my throat's going. At any time when a mob finds itself in the same area as a gas marker, this can happen in fire combat if it's fired, or movement if a unit moves into or through such an area, or shock if they retreat. They have to conduct a morale check, no DRM. If they fail, the mob player has a choice between conducting an immediate one-area retreat or becoming suppressed in place. That's pretty mild for, tear gas is nasty shit. Gas guns, these are going to be a specific item that you buy and you assign to various police group units, no more than 1 per squad. The water cannon and helicopters can also have them. If the last police group unit in the same area is eliminated, or the special vehicle is, the gas gun is removed from the game. It may not be fired by a suppressed unit. When it's fired into an area containing enemy or friendly units, you roll a d6. On a 6, the gas canister clunks somebody in the head and you get a wounded in action against that police. Barricades, again, I threw out the pieces, the counter sprue or framework, which apparently contained this, but basically there's 2 different types of things. Barricades can be placed before the start of the scenario, but cannot be built during the game. The marker is played on one of the lines on the 4 sides of an area. You get a defensive marker. This is basically a heavy-duty thing. There's something later in the optional rules that's similar. I don't remember what it's called. The benefits lost in fire combat if they're firing from a position at least 1 level higher than the barricade. Barricades can be placed in buildings for cumulative benefits with windows. Snipers have no maximum range in daytime. Mob snipers have a range of 3 at night. They cannot engage in shock combat and are eliminated if they're caught alone. Agitators. So we have one of these here. It's just a mummy or something. Agitators add 1 to the shock combat strength of any group or crowd unit they're stacked with. That's there. And give -1 to fire shock combat morale checks to all units in their area. No, all allied units. Having more than 1 agitator in an area doesn't affect things. Agitators are never suppressed, nor do they make morale checks on their own. At the mob player's option, they can retreat along with the unit in the area. That's probably a good idea because they are eliminated if ever caught alone in an area by police or if all units stacked with them are eliminated. Yeah, my throat's dying. I'm sorry. We'll hit Molotovs next. All right. Let's see how many more pages. I may not finish this today. I feel like I need to take a nap just to avoid being awake. Molotov cocktails thrown into adjacent areas, again, tracked on a number sheet there. Can be used by unsuppressed crowd or punk units. This counts as a fire combat attack. Molotovs are not actually carried, they're just tracked, the same as gas. A crowd counter can throw any number in 1 turn, but a punk can only throw 1. A Molotov makes fire combat attack with a total strength of 4 against each unit in the target area, I guess individually. After all morale checks have been made, make a fire check. You roll a die plus a DRM if there's a vehicle or building in the area, and the fire occurs on a 6 or greater. There's fire markers up here. It's on the back of them. Suppressions. Nothing can stay in an area with a fire in it. The owning player conducts an immediate one-area move out of the area when the fire starts. If a fire starts in an area, each vehicle in the area makes a separate fire check. If the vehicle catches fire, it'll just be eliminated. Any passengers on the vehicle unload or suppressed, and they'll get to retreat out of the area. Well, they move out of the area, actually, because retreat has specifics. Fires do not spread, but will burn for the rest of the game unless they go out naturally. That's an odd way to put it. The gas and fire check phase, they go out on a 6. Molotovs can be thrown into or out of a building, but not inside a building. I'm assuming they mean not from space to space within a building. Night and nightlight. Some scenarios take place at night, or night may fall during a scenario. During night turns, you have an extra DRM on fire and shock combat morale checks. And the maximum range fire is 3 areas, except for police snipers. A fire marker in an area will eliminate all open areas adjacent to it. Also, the helicopter spotlight can illuminate an area. And that just turns it into day, which allows a unit to draw a line of sight into it. I think ignoring, any dark areas between, because you can see perfectly fine in there. There's going to be different engagement levels at the beginning of each game. Each player can raise but not lower their engagement level. For every engagement level you raise it, though, you lose a level of victory. So if you raise your engagement level 2 levels above what it was at the start of the game, you can never win more than a marginal victory. And basically, it impacts what weaponry you can use and the effectiveness. So for example, for police, pushing and shoving, shock combat only, no gas, baton rounds, ADS, which is microwave, trying to cook people into leaving. Or brown noise, if you'd rather, or the water cannon. Crack heads can double shock combat for police groups, just to see this up. 1 round snipers will be allowed to fire, but only once in the game at 3. Then when we get to 4, all police units can use their normal fire combat rounds, lethal rounds. Shoot to kill, that doubles fire combat strength. And likewise here, Molotovs only become available at 1. Double shock combat for crowds, snipers being allowed. All group members being able to use fire combat, and all group using double fire strength. Now, the scenario we're going to be looking at, I think, starts with a fairly high EL. It's hard to justify buying a lot of fire combat units if you're not going to. Now let's see. Engagement level 4 for the police. Engagement level 4. Yeah. So. Right. Victory at the end of the last game turn of the scenario. Play stops victories judged. You deduct points for wounded in action and killed in action so you inflicted. Person with more victory points is the winner. This is determined by the absolute value of how many more victory points they have than the other player. The level of victory can be changed if people change their engagement level. You lose victory points for wounding or killing enemy units, but eliminating units gains you victory points. And so sometimes killing something happens when you eliminate something. It's not guaranteed, but sometimes. And so, there's this kind of balance between those. Level of victory is how many more victory points one player has than their opponent. If one player has a victory point total of 0 or less, assume that they have a total of 1. If both players have negative, the player with fewer victory points is the winner, but it's only marginal no matter what. If one player has more but less than twice as many, so it's not really the difference. It's not how many more, it's how many you have proportionally. If one player has more but less than twice as many, they get a marginal 2 to 3 times, essentially. If got it written correctly, though, there. Substantial, more than 3 or more times, decisive. All right. Baton rounds are a shock combat done at a distance. Beginning of a game, the police player can designate units of one class as having the baton rounds. I don't know if you buy these fuckers. I think you're just allowed to announce them. This does not cost extra cost, but all units of this class are so equipped and they can never use fire combat during the game. Instead, they'll use their shock combat when firing. The range is 3 areas maximum. The firing unit's able to draw line of sight to the target unit free of units, friendly or enemy. The firing unit may not attack units that are in a building or units where the line of sight to the target crosses a barricade or hedge. A baton round attack counts as a fire combat attack, so the firing units must select one unit to attack. Units firing baton rounds may combine their shock combat strengths if they're stacked with or adjacent to each other. As in regular fire combat, any number of attacks may be directed against one unit. However, unlike attacks with standard firearms, each attack is not followed by a morale check by the target unit. It's less scary to be hit with rubber bullets, unless they take out your eye or something. In resolving the attack, the player uses the appropriate column on the shock CRT. The die roll has -1 for each area the target is away from the firing units, to a maximum of -3. The water cannon is a vehicle that can fire a high stream of water up to 3 areas away in the fire combat phase. The water cannon can't attack units that are in a building or units where the line of sight crosses a barricade or hedge. The WC has a shock combat rating based on the range to the target: 10 adjacent, 5 2 areas away, 2 at 3. They're resolved on the shock CRT against all units in the area, but only one attack is made. The defender does not roll. A shot from a WC will automatically extinguish fire. And one gas gun can also be on the WC. The WC can launch tear gas in the same round that it conducts a water attack. Looks like you fire at a single location. So you're not just spraying down the street, hitting everyone. Active denial system. This is a vehicle-mounted system that uses the microwaves. It cannot be used on any scenario before 2010, but it can be used in any after if you buy it. The ADS cannot attack units in a building in the same area as gas cloud or units where the line of sight crosses a fire or barricade or hedge. It has infinite range even at night, but only one unit in a stack can be targeted. The ADS can apply its shock combat strength of 10 to one target in the fire combat phase. The die roll is not modified. If an X happens, it doesn't count as a wound. Although they may not be able to have kids later. Hidden setup and ambush. Any punk or sniper may be set up hidden at the start of the game in any building for 5 points extra per unit. These are optionals, right? So I would not have to use the hidden movement. Of course, it's already paid for, so it's like, well, maybe I should. It's just hard to do solo. A hidden unit is assumed to be anywhere in the building until it fires, or if an enemy unit enters an area in the building, it's then immediately placed in any area that's not occupied by an enemy unit. If a unit reveals its presence by firing, its fire strength is doubled for that attack only. Mounted police. Some police start as mounted. They can dismount voluntarily. They lose their horses, but just become a line squad when that happens. While mounted, they're faster, but can't enter buildings. They can charge, doubling their shock combat. To do this, they must start the movement phase at least 2 areas away from any mob player units and may not pass through any police units in the movement phase. The helicopter is an airborne vehicle with high mobile allowance. It pays 1 point to enter any area and is always considered a level higher than any terrain in the area or to have height advantage over anything. It can enter areas with enemy units, but not engage or be engaged via shock combat. However, it's a large, noisy, and intimidating machine. And optionally, any mob player morale checks in or adjacent to an area with a helicopter have a +1 DRM. I'm not sure who that option is on. Is that option as to, are you just making them that way as an additional option in the rules? Or is it an option, presumably, of the police player to be able to say, yeah, we're getting closer with this and scaring people? If a helicopter is eliminated by a K result, it crashes to the ground in the area it received that result. All units in the area are eliminated. No points are rewarded to anyone, and a fire starts in the area. Helicopters come with a searchlight, range infinite, plus the police player's choice of 1 gas gun or 1 sniper or 1 active denial system. It may not carry any other police units. I think you have to buy those things. I don't think the police player automatically gets their choice of any one of those 3 when they buy a helicopter. Not sure the way it's worded. Donut wagon. The donut wagon is placed at the beginning of the scenario and may not move. Police stacked with it will fight tenaciously to defend it and get a DRM on their morale check. But if the wagon is left behind, it gets eaten. TV crews are mob units, but they may be moved into or through areas no matter who occupies them. They do not hinder the movement of any other units through their area. They may not be attacked by the police. The results of any... Tell me about that again. I saw some of the shots. First of all, there was a recent assassination of a reporter, but also in Israel, but also during the BLM protests when they fired at Washington Square or whatever. I mean, they attacked them. They battered them. They didn't shoot them with real guns. The results of any, regardless of what the fearless leader was asking for, the results of any shock or fire combat attack by any unit in an adjacent area containing a TV crew are downgraded by 1 level. That is, in fire combat, Ks become Ws, Ws become no effect, and shock, X becomes a 2 becomes a 1. Having more than 1 TV crew in an area has no additional effect. This is just to indicate that, like, when the TV cameras are rolling, people are a lot less likely to want to get caught doing something horrible, I guess. Mob tactical disintegration. Now, this one's important. Riot mobs are temporary. Again, though this is optional. The mob player must fight against time and cumulative chaotic effects. This rule is used in the riot-type scenarios, only in riot-type scenarios, which I think we're not doing for this one. I don't remember. No, this is the first of the Type 2 war in the streets. The mob player records their tactical disintegration number, normally equal to 10% of the points for all their forces. But this percentage can be modified. Or TDN. Is that what it's? Tactical disintegration number, TDN, I guess so. And adjust this number according to the following schedule. When the police use non-lethal weapons, it reduces that number. When they use fire combat, it reduces it more heavily, 2 dice. Each time a mob unit takes damage or disperses, it takes further reductions. But each time a police unit is eliminated, either retreat or whatever, the TDN increases. At the end of each mob player suppression recovery phase, the mob player compares their TDN to the number of the current game turn. If the number of the game turn is equal or greater than the TDN, then the game stops and victory is judged. Okay. Oh, we're getting close. Overreaction. This optional rule should be used to model an especially tense or volatile situation where the police are badly disciplined or badly trained, or the soldiers being policemen, or the rioters are wound up. Each time a unit of any type is eliminated, the owning player rolls a die. On a roll of 6, the EL raises 1 level. I don't know if that, like, hurts their victory conditions, though. Barriers. So we already have barricades, which are, you know, basically big, unmovable objects that provide quite a bit of cover. But barriers are going to fit more to the idea of like flipping over a park bench or bringing bicycle racks to use as fencing or something like that. These can be purchased by the police before the game or constructed by the mob during it. Barriers should be found on the flip side of barricade markers. Yeah, well, mine got thrown away, unfortunately. A barrier is just like a barricade, except it doesn't give protection against fire combat, including shock fire attacks from baton rounds, water cannon, or ADS. The police player can place barriers at the start of the game. The mob player can build them during play. A group or crowd unit that does nothing else during the turn may roll the die during the suppression recovery. A group rolls once, a crowd rolls 3 times. Place a barrier counter in the area every time a 6 is rolled along one of the 4 sides of the area. There's no additional benefits to adding a barrier to an existing barricade. A barrier can be destroyed by any group or crowd unit only if only friendly units are in the area and it does nothing else during that player turn. Remove the barrier. Now this is kind of interesting because the crowd can build barriers, the mob player can build barriers out of anything. The police can never move nor redeploy their barriers, and they can be ripped down at will. So I don't know if they're worth buying. Vehicles, only the police have vehicles. Vehicles are anything with the wheels and an engine, including trucks, water cannon, and the donut wagon. ADS and the tank. Vehicles cannot enter buildings and may not cross barricades, barriers, or hedges. Vehicles may not enter areas containing enemy... I think the tank could probably cross most of that. For simplicity, vehicles may not enter areas containing enemy group or crowd units. But if you want, you can make up your own rules to crush the crowd. The police becoming more and more common and more legal in friendly Hydra. The police player may start the game with units loaded into trucks, and each truck can carry a police group or any number of snipers. Just for quicker deployment. I don't know how big a deal that is with the movement rates in this game, but we'll see. I mean, infantry moves like 4. How much does a vehicle move? That's not a vehicle. Here's the vehicle. Vehicles move like 10. Units carried in a truck do not do anything until they unload. They unload in the same area as the truck. Neither the truck nor the passengers may move during that phase. To load passengers, they start in the same space. Neither can move. Again, note the units carried in the trucks. Vehicles not affected by fire combat attacks from trained crowds or slingshot punks. These are assumed to be throwing rocks or whatnot. But they can be fired upon by other units that have a fire combat strength. A K will result in eliminating the vehicle with 1 KIA. Let's assume that'll be the driver and the vehicle's too shot up to use. On any other result, nothing happens. A vehicle that is destroyed by a fire check from a Molotov cocktail is eliminated, but there's no kills. Vehicles in shock combat. A vehicle has a shock combat strength of 0. Vehicles do not retreat. However, if a vehicle is caught alone in an area with enemy units, and a retreat result is inflicted on it, it's eliminated. It's been flipped over or whatever. Any passengers in the vehicle will unload and be suppressed, and the shock combat will continue against those passengers who can't do much about it because they're just cowering. Civilian police vehicles, departments often have surplus military equipment. You can treat police vehicles as armored. In this case, they cannot be eliminated by fire or shock combat, but they can still be set afire by Molotovs. When using this rule, extended range, the range of a group with a fire combat strength is equal to its strength measured in areas. Any attacks on units more than half the range are conducted at half strength. I don't think I want to use that. Was iffy on the hidden one. This one, I just don't think. Riots are noisy, chaotic events. Even with portable radios, it's difficult for a force commander to get well-trained policemen to form up. And while riots can be assembled through the use of cell phones and social media, physical crowds are unpredictable and can be difficult to get moving. Players can use this rule to affect one or both of the players to handicap the police. All police entering a mob-occupied area to conduct shock combat must have started the movement phase either stacked together or adjacent to at least one other police unit entering the area. For the mob, you can use the above roll for a mob, or have the mob player roll 2d6 at the beginning of their movement. That's the maximum number of crowd units they can move. Any mob group or crowd unit that does not have an LOS, at least one other mob unit of the same type or an agitator, may not move more than half its movement allowance. There's kind of a, hey, choose your own adventure aspect to that. Clearly, there's the understanding that, hey, command and control doesn't really exist, but then there's also the qualification of, do you really want to strip it away and make it, very, very difficult, especially for the mobs, to operate at all? You have this problem in a lot of games where you don't have real formations in play, where, who am I? Am I this God view who controls everything in a war game? And in this, it's particularly difficult. The police are probably being deployed and somewhat controlled, but the mobs, while they're activating forces behind them and individuals who have gathered them to achieve certain agenda, once mob action starts, it's very, very hard to keep it under control. So, I don't know. It reminds me of things like the food fight game that came out in Dragon Magazine. Yeah, what does it mean to be this many people? Once you get to a certain level of conflict, I have a hard time picturing things. And that's kind of the thing, I was just doing Leipzig, where you have all these units in nice, pretty formations and everything. And everything makes sense, right? There's people giving orders to those units to do things, and they're following those, and there's lines forming and everything. This feels more like the modern, 20th century type of warfare and beyond, which, whether it's police action or individuals in a food fight in a cafeteria or on a spaceship or whatever, all of it feels like, well, there's nobody really controlling them. These are each individual actors making decisions. And some of those actors may be a mob operating, with its mob mind or whatever. But yeah, that's sort of where the, there's a reason I tend to stay away from the more modern skirmish type stuff. And this feels close enough to it that, I've got my reluctance. Anyway, we're going to send this up. Apologies for how I am, whatever.